Chapter 7. Lydia in a class of her own. Ambrose knelt down and put a warm, gentle hand on Lydia's shoulder. If you have any problems or you need me for anything, I shall be with Draco and Hermione. Probably in Draco's office or the library. Harry and Ron say they will be shuttling back and forth between here and their office. I am sure Tessa will locate us for you, should you so desire. Tessa nodded in confirmation. I'll be all right, Uncle Ambrose, Lydia assured him. She was keen to be on her way and exploring all the school had to offer. Her new best friend, Tessa, had borrowed some robes for her to wear, and they had, between them, come up with the cover story that Lydia was a Muggle-born whose family were friends of Professor Malfoy. It was a sign of how much had changed over the past decade, that this would even seem possible. But nobody at Hogwarts would have expected Draco to be anything but friendly to Muggle-borns or their Muggle parents. Tessa led Lydia back down the corridor towards the entrance hall. I'll take you up to our common room, Tessa told her. There should be a few 6th and 7th formers up there. It'll give you a chance to see your dorm before the rest of the firsties get back. Will there be room for me? Lydia asked. Oh yes, Tessa assured her. The dorm will cope. Tessa took her to the bottom of the marble staircase and stopped for a moment to take her bag. It's quite a way up to the tower, she explained, and that bag looks a bit heavy. Also, you'll have to keep your wits about you. The stairs can be tricky until you get used to them. Lydia frowned in puzzlement, but soon found out what she meant by this. Some steps were invisible traps in disguise. Some staircases were only there on certain days or at certain times. And everywhere there were shortcuts behind hangings or through invisible doorways. Lydia smiled up at Tessa. The young Muggle girl was delighting in the wonderful strangeness of it all. For the first time she truly believed she was in a new, hidden world and not just in a dream. Here we are, Tessa announced as they came to a halt in front of a large painting of a pretty and rather corpulent lady in a pink silken dress. The lady in the painting turned towards them. She smiled at Tessa, but frowned down upon Lydia. Password? She asked in a haughty tone. Spanakopita, Tessa replied, following up with, This is Lydia. She's our guest. But she's... the now scowling lady began. Yes, we know, Tessa assured her. She's a guest of Professor Lee, who would be ever so grateful if you were to keep her status confidential. The pink lady straightened her back. Well, of course I can keep the headmistress's secrets. I am the soul of discretion, as you know. I do, Tessa nodded. I think Professor Lee chose Gryffindor Tower for Lydia's quarters because she knew she could count on you. The pink lady gave a self-important wiggle of her shoulders, and the portrait swung forward, revealing a hole in the wall, raised up above the level of the floor. As they started to step through, Lydia turned to her guide. It's not very wheelchair-friendly, is it? Tessa stopped in her tracks for a few moments to think about this. There aren't any people in wheelchairs, though. Either our healers can heal them, or, I suppose, they would have some magical way of getting around. Oh, okay, Lydia conceded. Couldn't the healers heal muggles in wheelchairs? No, sorry. There's a law that prevents us getting too involved with muggles. It's called the International Statute of Secrecy, Lydia finished. I remember now. It's just that there's this really sweet girl at our school called Carla. She had an accident when she was little. Tessa gave an apologetic smile. Anyway, don't forget when you're here that you're supposed to be a witch. Oh, yes, sorry. Lydia looked around the common room. A wide fireplace stood to one side of the large circular space, with a semicircle of comfortable armchairs surrounding it. There were many other chairs and tables, scattered haphazardly around the floor, but with a clear path through the middle of them. The walls held a random array of paintings and windows, looking as though they had exploded from the centre of the room and stuck wherever they had landed. Hangings of scarlet and gold hung over any uncovered areas, giving the place a rich, warm, and ultimately cosy feel. The fire was not lit, the weather being warm, but Lydia could make out a faint tang of soot and wood smoke on the air, with a hubbub of bodies and unwashed socks. It was not disgusting, but it did have a whiff of sports hall changing rooms. Lydia had not noticed on first entering the room, but there were a couple of groups of older students seated in some of the armchairs. There was mumbling from a few, but it was subdued. They could barely be heard until she stopped and listened. "Revision groups," Tessa explained in a whisper. "Not long until the exams." They crossed the common room, causing the minimum of disruption. At the other side were 2 staircases. "Boys' dorms are up that way," Tessa indicated to the stairs on the left. "Girls are this way." "Is there a spare bed?" Lydia asked as they started to climb. "Never and always," Tessa grinned. Lydia stared at her. "The dormitories are always the right size for the number of people who need to be in them. It will add a bed for you in the first year's dorm." "But how?" Lydia frowned. Magic?" Tessa reminded her. "Oh, of course," Lydia grimaced. "Sorry, I'll have to be more careful." "No, it's fine. As a muggle-born, you wouldn't be used to magic anyway." Taking a door off the stairway, they entered the first-year girls' dormitory. There were 8 or 10 beds, all 4 posters with hangings. Each had a large trunk at its foot, apart from the furthest on the left. Tessa walked her down between the beds to this last one and put her bag on it. "This will be yours," she told Lydia. "This bed wouldn't even have been here this morning." Lydia looked it over. "It doesn't look new," she noted, "but I suppose it's in keeping with all the others. It's lovely, actually. I've never had a 4-poster. "Glad you approve," Tessa chuckled. "What do I need to do about laundry and so on?" Lydia inquired. "Nothing," Tessa told her. "All done by magic?" "Kind of," Tessa said. "All done by the house elves." "Oh, of course," Lydia nodded. "Harry told us about them. He was friends with one called Dobby." "Wow." Tessa shook her head in disbelief. "I keep forgetting you're friendly with Harry Potter. What's he like?" Lydia pursed her lips for a moment. "He's nice, but he seems serious quite a lot of the time. But then he is head aura, so I guess he would be. It was a while before we realised how important he'd been in the war. The way he told it, it was everybody else who was important, and he was just tagging along. Ginny, Mrs. Potter that is, put us straight. Without Harry Potter, everything would have been lost, and we probably wouldn't be here now," Tessa breathed. "He's famous all over the world. Well, all over the magical world anyway." "It seems weird that we didn't know anything about the war," Lydia said, unpacking her toothbrush and toothpaste. "Though my uncle did say there were odd things in the news at the time." "Think yourselves lucky that you know nothing about it. If Voldemort had won, I don't think it would have been any secret from you all." Tessa stopped and shook herself. After a few seconds, she continued in a brighter voice. "I know you can't say while you're here, but what does your uncle do?" Lydia had to think. What did Uncle Ambrose do? He didn't seem to go to work. Whenever she saw him, he was just there. "I think he's retired now," she replied with a frown. "He's told me about lots of different jobs he's had, but I don't think he goes out to work now. He's clever, and he reads a lot, but mostly he just seems to be weird. He doesn't dress like normal people, and he doesn't speak like normal people. I don't think he even thinks like normal people. He's not mad or anything. Maybe it's just that he's really clever or something." Tessa nodded. "When I first saw him, I thought he might be a wizard. He isn't, though, you can tell. Once you've been around it a long time, you can sort of feel magic. He doesn't feel like that. From a distance, he would easily pass for a wizard, though, or a warlock." "What's a warlock?" Lydia asked. Tessa grinned. "It depends who you ask. Generally, a warlock is an older, distinguished wizard. Your uncle looks distinguished, in his own way." "I never thought of him like that. More annoying than distinguished." "You would think that way," Tessa laughed. "He's family." After Lydia had unpacked a few more things from her bag and put them in the small bedside cabinet, Tessa pulled out a piece of parchment from her robes. According to the timetable for the first years, they're doing potions at the moment, Tessa explained. Shall we go down and see them? Yes, please, Lydia enthused. They retraced their steps back down to the common room and then out into the corridor. They took the various sets of stairs back down to the entrance hall. Lydia noticed the paintings on the walls this time. She had seen moving portraits of the Potter's house, of course, but the scale was different here. All around them there was movement and activity in the paintings. Lydia thought that surely nobody could ever feel lonely here. Once they reached the entrance hall, they took the door that led down to the dungeons. This is where Draco's office is, Lydia observed. Professor Malfoy. That's right, said Tessa. The potions labs are down here. They continued along the cool, gloomy corridor. Lydia began to notice a strange smell. It was like ashes and electricity and flowers all combined. Here we are, Tessa told her. Professor Verdi takes them for potions. I'll come in with you. Don't you have your own classes to go to? Asked Lydia. Not if I can visit Professor Verdi, she grinned. Tessa knocked on the heavy, dark wooden door. Ah, who graces us with their presence? Came a musical voice from within. Please enter and join our merry gathering. Tessa beamed at Lydia, then opened the door. The large room on the other side held ranks of large wooden benches and a long desk raised on a dais at the other end. At the tables, visible through wisps of grey and pinkish haze, stood the students, wearing robes and looking dishevelled. By the desk stood a tall, slim, and rather elegant man. His calmness and tasteful grooming were a stark contrast with the flustered students. His robes were cut with a supernatural precision to leave no doubt about his trim, lithe physique. His hair looked as though it had been sleeked to perfection and then expertly dishevelled to the exact degree needed to say, Hey, I don't care too much about tidy hair. I merely wouldn't want to upset you by looking messy. He was stylish beyond all reason. Tessa, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Gudgeon, he announced to the class in a voice as warm and smooth as caramel, spiced with a hint of an Italian accent. Prefect and star pupil. Who have you brought for us, Tessa? The professor smiled a quizzical smile of movie star proportions, crinkling the corners of his eyes by precisely the correct amount and showing the merest hint of pearl-white teeth. Professor Verdi, this is Lydia Ward, Tessa introduced her companion. She's a friend of Harry Potter, and he wanted her to see what's in store for her when she comes to Hogwarts. The professor nodded sagely. Professor Lee has told us you would be visiting. He gave a subtle wink to the prefect and her charge. If you don't mind, Tessa continued, we'll sit quietly at the back and watch. No, ladies, please sit by me, the professor insisted. I can help explain it all to you. The professor drew his wand with an elegant swirl. 2 chairs appeared beside his desk. The girls sat beside him, Lydia closest to him. Professor Verdi, you can call me Stefano as you're not a student yet, explained the basics of potion making to Lydia. They discussed the types of potions that could be made, the range of ingredients, how different ways of combining ingredients could lead to enormously different potions. The professor appeared delighted at how Lydia listened carefully and asked sensible questions. Before they knew where they were, it was time for Professor Verdi to mark the students' work. As they took it in turns to bring their potions up to the professor's desk, the students nervously looked on as Verdi explained to Lydia and the class where the potion work had gone wrong. Out of the whole class, 2 had got everything right and produced an actual sleeping draught. Congratulations to you both, Professor Verdi beamed at the class. To the rest of you, I hope you were listening as we talked about what huge differences any tiny errors made. That will be your homework. Tell me about mistakes. Which mistakes are easily made? Where do you find you are most likely to go wrong? You have had the best part of a year of potions classes with your favourite professor now, and every one of you has made these important little slips. Time for you to, as they say, fess up. 30 inches of parchment by Monday, please. A unanimous groan rose from the class as they packed their school bags. Oh, come along now, Professor Verdi joked. You know you love your potions classes. The renewed groaning from the students seemed to contradict his assessment of their enthusiasm. Lydia, I hope to see you here next year. The potions teacher smiled. If there had been enough light in the dungeon, his teeth would surely have sparkled. And you, Tessa, I will see you next in our lesson next Tuesday, yes? Absolutely. I mean, the firsties have History of Magic now, with Professor Binns. I didn't think Lydia would gain much from being in with them, but she does seem to have a lot of questions about potions. So, we could be available. Alas, he sighed, packing his briefcase. I have agreed to take Professor Malfoy's defence class while he is otherwise occupied. I'm afraid I need to leave right away. Once out of the dungeons, Tessa sighed as she watched Professor Verdi stride purposefully away. Are we going to go to the history class? Lydia asked. I don't think you would get much out of it, honestly, Tessa said. The subject isn't too bad, but they're with Professor Binns. He's dreadfully dull. It would be impossible to explain to him who you are, and it might be weird for you because he's a ghost. Lydia gasped. He's what? Yes, a ghost. We have them here. I'll introduce you to some of the nicer ones at dinner. We have a poltergeist too somewhere. He's called Peeves. Hardly anyone sees him nowadays, not since Professor Lee took over. Good riddance, I say. He could be quite horrible at times. Anyway, if you don't mind, I thought we'd go and see the Gryffindor third years. They've got care of magical creatures with Hagrid. Professor Hagrid, I should say. I've met Hagrid, Lydia chirruped. He's really nice. Well, yes, he is. He's a bit mad. But I think you'll like what they're doing this afternoon. The third years were excited about it this morning. Ooh, what is it? Tessa smiled at her as they left the building by the front door and emerged into the sunlight. Just you wait and see. They crossed the grass, heading towards the forest. Lydia could see a group of students milling around to the left of what she already knew to be Hagrid's hut. A few of them jogged up to join their classmates, seemingly having arrived late. Hagrid emerged from behind his hut and looked up towards the school for any latecomers. He saw Tessa and Lydia, who both waved. The two of them trotted down to meet him. Hello, you two, he beamed as they arrived. You showing our Lydia around, Tessa? Good, good. Everyone, you probably all know Tessa. The class murmured. One or two waved to the prefect. And this here is Lydia, Hagrid continued. She's a friend of the great Harry Potter, she is. There was more of a murmur this time, even though every one of them must have met Harry through his dark arts talks at the school. He was clearly still a legend to them. So, you'll be here to see the foals, then, I imagine, Hagrid addressed the two visitors. Ooh, horses? Lydia squeaked. Horses? Hagrid chuckled. Horses? No, little un. Tell her, everybody. Unicorns! The class chorused. Some of the girls almost squealed. Some of the boys tried to sound blasé, without much success. Right, Hagrid continued. We'll be going down to the paddock. Boys better stay outside the fence. Unicorns are better with girls. Any of the girls as wants to stay out with the boys, well, that's fine too. Lydia, you come on ahead with me. You're littlest and youngest. They'll like you best. Lydia fairly skipped with excitement as she struggled to keep up with Hagrid's long strides. The paddock was not far away, on the edge of the forest, and surrounded on three sides by the trees. A rough wooden fence ran across the open front, with a large gate in it. The sides and back were open to the trees, such that any animal in the paddock was free to leave whenever it wished. Hagrid let all but 2 of the girls through the gate. Tessa and 1 other girl stayed outside the paddock with the boys. Hagrid led Lydia to the middle of the paddock and lined the other girls up by the fence. He strode quietly down to the edge of the trees, taking something out of his pocket as he did so. Lydia could not see what he was holding, but soon realised it was some sort of whistle, as Hagrid made a strange trilling sound with it. The sound did not seem to belong to the place where they were. It echoed where it should not have echoed, as though it had been sounded inside a huge cathedral. Lydia and the rest waited expectantly. Breaths were held. Hearts seemed to beat too loudly. Even the bird song seemed to have paused in reverence. Minutes, which felt like hours, passed Lydia by. Finally, Hagrid moved. He started to step backwards, slowly and smoothly, as quiet as the rustling wind. Lydia could make out a light under the trees. It seemed that the moon was hiding there, lighting the leaves from below rather than from above, as was its usual habit. In the centre of the silvery light, a shape appeared. It resolved into a smallish, fine-boned white horse. A horse with a single, slim, silver horn. A unicorn. Hagrid crouched down and spoke in a whisper. Lydia could not hear what Hagrid was saying. She noticed that the unicorn did not fully emerge from under the canopy of the forest, but that, even so, it was paying attention to Hagrid's whispered words. She sighed, and noticed that even the air tasted sweeter, smelled cleaner. The unicorn turned unhurriedly and slipped once more into the trees. Hagrid turned to Lydia and beamed. He motioned her forward and took a few steps back until they were side by side. "She likes the look of you," he murmured. "You wait and see now." Lydia felt a cold yet warming shiver of excitement flood through her. Within moments the moon glow under the trees returned. In the midst of the glow was the figure of a tiny unicorn, waist high to Lydia, so just up to Hagrid's shin. She turned to look at the gargantuan professor, but he had slipped back a few metres, unseen by her. He raised his eyebrows and nodded slightly. She turned back to the unicorn foal. It was a light golden colour all over, and its hooves looked as if they were cast from pure gold. There was a silver glow under the trees where the foal's mother must have been standing. The foal had taken a few steps forward, and was standing partly sideways, looking at Lydia with one beautiful dark eye. Lydia believed that was the kindest eye she would ever see in her life. She raised her hand gradually and stopped with it half outstretched towards the young unicorn. The foal dipped its head slightly, which Lydia took to mean that it would be all right to stroke it. She lifted her hand to its mane, which was a lighter white gold tone than its flanks. It felt like silk. Behind her she could vaguely hear Hagrid tell the class that unicorn foals were born pure gold, and stayed that colour until they were about 2 years old. At that age they turned silver. Their horns did not appear until 4 years old. They were fully grown and a glowing silvery white by 7 years. Lydia half listened, but could not turn away from the foal. By this time she was holding out her hand for it to investigate with its lips. They felt warm and as smooth and soft as the finest kid-leather gloves. The face of the foal's mother was visible now through the trees. Lydia noticed another glow further to the right, and another foal was emerging from the forest. A girl from Hagrid's class was stepping forward. Not knowing why, Lydia made a hesitant move, somewhere between a bow and a curtsy, and stepped back. Her heart ached to stay with the unicorn, but she knew someone else would be yearning to take her place. She turned to Hagrid and the rest and walked back to the fence where they all stood. As the girls inside the paddock took turns to step forward and meet the foals, Hagrid went on to describe the lives of unicorns. He told them the uses that unicorn hair and horns found in potions and wandcraft. He told them a chilling tale of how an evil wizard had staved off death by drinking unicorn blood, and how, In Hagrid's opinion, that act had sealed his eventual doom. As he spoke, the students inside and outside the paddock gate took notes on rolls of parchment. Lydia couldn't imagine ever forgetting a moment of this experience. Eventually, the class came to an end. Professor Hagrid beckoned Lydia and the students out of the paddock before shuffling some way towards the trees and thanking the unicorns, mothers and children. Lydia heaved a sigh, which went right down to her boots, as Uncle Ambrose would have said. Tessa put an arm around Lydia's shoulder. Lydia beamed up at her. "You're almost glowing like a unicorn yourself, Lydia," the prefect smiled. Hagrid shut the paddock gate and turned to them both. "That young coat took a real shine to our Lydia, he did. I'd swear he kept looking over to you every time the other girls was changing over. Didn't think I'd ever see that with a muggle. Maybe he knew you was different to all the others. Cleverer unicorns. Not like centaurs, like, but they definitely knows a thing or two." As they walked back up to the school, Hagrid kept looking at Lydia with a kind of paternal pride. Lydia felt she was a foal, and Hagrid a proud unicorn mother. She giggled at the idea.